second chapter, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw a star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler, who will be the shepherd of the people of Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, of incense, and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. May God bless the reading and hearing of this, his holy word. This is Epiphany Sunday, the Sunday we set aside to take and commonly think about those magi who come and visit Jesus. We think about and talk about the gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. But that's what we typically do. This morning we're going to take and look at this story through another king's eyes. Through someone else who's part of the story, but quite often we just kind of read through it and kind of let it slide to the end. There's another king. It's King Herod. King Herod, and we're going to take a few minutes just to think about how this story is part of his story. Now, to begin with, you have to understand that the King Herod of Jesus' birth is not the same King Herod of his crucifixion and passion story. They're related, but they're not the same guy. The King Herod of Jesus' birth is worked to get to his position of king of Judea, the king of the Jews. Part of his story begins with his father, who was also a king, but he was executed when he was implicated in the possible poisoning of Julius Caesar. They thought that he was part of this conspiracy and allegedly part of it, and as part of it was executed. Now, Herod worked really hard to clear his father's name, to try to prove and make people understand that he really wasn't part of it. And over time and manipulation and working at it, he fell into the grace of Caesar Augustus and was appointed the king of Judea, king of the Jews. Now, Herod had seen what had happened to his father, and he treasured this throne that he sat upon. It was his obsession to have this and to hold on to it. And nothing would take it away from him. He would go to any extreme to hold on to this power, this authority, this kingship. Even so far as to kill two of his sons when he heard rumor that they were plotting to overthrow him. So this King Herod is a pretty ruthless guy. He wants and drives himself to be king. So that's where we find ourselves when these magi appear before King Herod. Now, we've talked over different moments and times and years about we don't know how many magi there are. We don't know whether they were kings or whether they were magicians, sorcerers, astrologers, astronomers. I recently, this past week or so, read that there's an idea that they were actually like the right-hand men of some kings. They were a kind of an envoy, emissaries, if you will, of these other kings that showing up to pay homage to this newborn king of the Jews with their treasures that they would lay before him on behalf of the kings that they represent. It really doesn't matter. What matters is there are these wise men who have shown up on King Herod's doorstep. They make an assumption that probably makes sense, is that, hey, if they've come all this way to see this new king of the Jews that's born, certainly Herod, who's right there, right in the same vicinity, he's got to know himself too. So he must be able to give them some directions. But did you catch what happens when Herod hears about this? It says in this translation he was disturbed. In other translations it says he was troubled. This is not good news for Herod. He isn't familiar with the prophecy. Word hasn't come to him about this newborn king of the Jews. Oh, by the way, would you want to be the guy that kind of goes up to Herod and tells him about this? Nah, I wouldn't. So he gathers others and says, listen, tell me about it. Tell me what you know about this prophecy, this new king of the Jews. They tell him the prophecy. Herod calls in these wise men and says, listen, here's what I need you to do. Why don't you go and find this child? But when you find him, come back and let me know, won't you? Because I too would like to go and worship him. Now, my image at that point is Snidely Whiplash. Remember Dudley Do-Right? The guy kind of twirling his mustache. Yes, I want to go worship him too. Yes, I do, absolutely. So off they go. Off they go, and they find Jesus and give him the treasures. But here's a little part of the epiphany of this, is that they get told by God, listen, don't go back. Don't go back to King Herod. Go home a different way. Avoid him altogether. So they do. Now I didn't read all of the scripture. The story continues. Herod takes and realizes over time that they haven't coming back. And he's pretty confident that this thing they had talked about is taking place. So he has a plan. But before he can execute his plan, God intervenes one more time and says to Joseph, Joseph, you need to take the child and his mother, and you need to leave. You need to go to Egypt, and you need to stay there until the time is right, and I'll let you know when it's safe for you to return. So Joseph does that very thing. He packs up Jesus and Mary, and off they go to live in Egypt for a while. Herod's plan is simply this. He sends his people into Bethlehem in the vicinity to kill all male children 2 years of age and younger. Simple plan. We just eliminate all of the possibilities, and therefore my throne, my power, my authority is no longer threatened. All of this, to some extent, I think is beyond our imagination. How is it that a man could take and be so hungry for power and authority and to stay in his position that he's willing to not only kill his own 2 sons, but to kill all these other young children? I'm not sure it could happen in today's world. he'd get away with it. But such was Herod's power and strength. He simply did. Now the story continues, and in time, Herod dies. And once again, God sends word to Joseph that it's okay. Now it's time you can return home. So what does this all mean for us? I mean, after all, it's one story. It's this one guy, Herod. But what it says to me is that here, even in the moment of Jesus' birth, when he's this young child, already there were people out there working, trying to figure it out, trying to plot and plan how to silence him, how to eliminate him. And if you think about Jesus' life, especially his ministry that embarks for years, it continues. Over and over again, there is this plot, this idea of somehow we need to quiet Jesus. We need to stop it. We need to silence it. And even when they come and put him upon a cross, thinking, we've finally done it. It doesn't work. Even if you continue to follow the story, there's persecution that continues for centuries afterwards, saying we've got to stop this whole idea of Christianity, all this Jesus stuff. We've got to stop it. We've got to quiet it down. And the Romans tried over and over again through their persecution to quiet Jesus. Quiet this idea of Christianity. But let's not kid ourselves and say, well, yeah, that's ancient history. Doesn't it still continue today? Aren't there still Herods around us today who work really hard to take and say, you know what, we don't want to hear this Jesus talk. We don't want to hear about this Christianity. You know, we don't want to be exposed to it. We want it all to just be quiet and go away. Around us, the Herod of 2,000 years ago continues to have voice even today. I don't get it. I don't understand why you would not take and want to silence the message of love neighbor, love God, to take and quiet a message of grace and mercy and trying to help others to make a difference. Why it is that you want to quiet a message about forgiveness and grace. And as I thought about it, maybe it's very much simpler than all of that. It's because people don't want that light of Christ to shine into their darkness where they're comfortable. People who, like Herod, he was real comfortable with his power and his authority, the fear that he could generate. And he feared that this Christ that had come into the world would do something to disrupt it. And that's where he was wrong, because Christ never was about power and authority and taking over this, like, governments and so forth. What was up to Jesus was to take and reach into our hearts and souls, to rule those things, not the world as we know it. People are afraid that the things that they enjoy, let's call it what it is, the sin that they enjoy, that somehow that Christ takes and shines a light and exposes it and says, you know what, we don't want to be any part of that. We just want to be able to live our lives without any exposure. And that's where it becomes a little personal too. Because if we're going to be honest with ourselves, isn't there at times a little bit of Herod in each of us? That at times, it's fine to talk about Jesus as we gather on Sunday morning. It's fine to talk about Jesus and stand up for what we care about and believe in. Maybe we're in a Bible study or some other church activity. But aren't there other places where that little bit of Herod sneaks out and says, you know what, this isn't, I'm not going to talk about Jesus here, or I'm not going to allow Christ to come out now. I need to silence that. I need to push it down. And maybe it's in those very moments that we need to have our own little epiphany to say, yeah, I just got to allow Jesus to come all the time, be out there. And what I need to silence and what I need to push aside is the Herod of my own life and the Herod of our world. To allow that light of Christ to continue to shine. Next week, as we gather, a lot of the things that we look around and see this morning will be gone. The tree will be gone. The lights will be gone. The nativity will be gone. It's a little depressing. But it is part of the world that we live in. That very quickly, the light of Christmas, the light that comes in Jesus Christ, will pack away. But what we need to do is to continue to allow that light to continue to shine. And maybe it's not here with fancy decorations, but it can be here in our lives. And that light will expose the Herods of the world, the Herods of our own life. Ultimately, who has the power and the authority? And maybe Herod's fear was right. That ultimately, that little child that he feared, that he saw was a threat, really was. And yet 2,000 years later, who is it that reigns? Who is it that truly is king? It's a decision for each of us to make for ourselves. We talk about the kings that come with Epiphany. Help us to remember the greatest king is that of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Let's pray. Oh God, at times we do allow the Herods of this world to